Welcome back to the third and final hour of today's edition of Community Pulse right here on Radio 786 100.4 FM. It is Wednesday. That means it is time for our segment on matters of social justice. And today, again, a very provocative topic for you, the strength in the sweetest whisper. Keep in mind that we are going in the direction of Allah through the best of women. And so, in the past few weeks, again, we found ourselves as women with the rest of society smothered, suffocating, and stuck with chains at our feet. But we also discovered a ladder and a way out as we continue to climb. And then we explored the networks, communications, and interactions. And more importantly, we considered how a wealthy merchant lady and of the best of women, Lady Khadijah AS, may have used her privilege to better and to benefit humanity. We looked at Lady Khadijah AS before she got married. That was in our discussion on a queen without a king. Then we explored the dynamics of how she came to meet and marry the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now what we are going to do today is we're going to lean in a little bit closer to hear her whisper more than just sweet nothings. With this week's topic, the strength in the sweetest whisper, we welcome in studio with us activist, researcher, student of Quran, online consultant, and urban garden mom, Lilla Helsinger, to join us. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Welcome as always. How are you, Sister Lilla?
Alhamdulillah, and yourself?
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, very well. And so perhaps you can start us off with your dua.
Inshallah. Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We know nothing except that which Allah teaches us. Ya Allah, teach us that which will benefit us and increase us in our knowledge. Let our actions be done for your sake sincerely, and do not place therein any portion for other than you. Indeed, we ask you for the love, for your love. We ask you for your love and the love of those who love you, and love for all those actions that will lead to your love. Ameen, Thumma Ameen. Lighten our hearts through the Quran, beautify our characters through it, and save us from the punishment of the fire through it. Make the Quran a proof for us, and do not make it a proof against us. Show us truth as truth, and grant us the ability to follow it. Show us falsehood as falsehood, and grant us the ability to abstain from it. Ameen, Thumma Ameen. Loosen our tongues, open our chests, and may this particular interview benefit both our dunya, akhirah, with protection from the hellfire, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive our mistakes. Peace and blessings be upon the Prophet Muhammad and all the Anbiya, especially the woman that he has declared peace and blessings upon, the woman that we are looking at, especially right now, Khadijah alayhi salam, and ultimately may this all be for the benefit of drawing us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ameen, thumma ameen. Okay.
Ameen. As you mentioned now, yes, the focus is still on the life of Lady Khadijah, and instead of just focusing on her as the wife of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and sort of moving on from them, as I pointed out during the introduction, there's so many facets of her life that sort of made up the holistic and the whole Lady Khadijah. Her life before the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she had a full life. She was a whole range of things, and there were a whole range of characteristics and qualities that we identified through those conversations. And then, of course, she was what you call the queen without a king. And so you took us through to some of those dynamics about how she came then to meet and marry the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I remember last week in our discussion. So more than just what she was, as I said, in most of the sort of the dominant writings as the wife of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when we were speaking about her before that, and you mentioned in particular a friend that she had, and so the idea around, so if you can't be Khadijah, then be the sort of person that
somebody
Khadijah
that would be in her company. Inshallah.
Yes, absolutely. But so today we are leaning in closer to hear her whisper. And so we're looking at the strength in her whisper.
Yeah, I'm going to do a combination of a recap, but also fill in some blanks that I've made. But we're playing on a lot of parallels in her life, like with business and the personal. So, for example, last week or the week before, I discussed income generation, according to Dan Locke. The old and more cringing way to sell or market is to try and push a sell, which comes across as desperate and needy. Desperate and needy is creepy. The modern and more sophisticated way is to set up a funnel system where you, through a broader net, raise consciousness, and then there is the buying journey that the client experiences until he or she becomes a hot lead. Finally, there is a landing page or some sort of gateway that brings the client into contact with a person called a closer. A successful closer doesn't push, they pull. They softly pull, they lean back with receptive tone and are very cool about it. It just so happens that this is also influenced by the yin energy type of the Wing Chun, as we discussed, as opposed to the more invasive Western style of selling and marketing. Think of the hypermarket ads, the man shouting with a megaphone. Have you ever seen on the streets, or if you've been on the streets and the sellers scream at you and that makes you want to run away? Yeah. So being loud comes across as desperate, and desperate is repelling, not attracting. The loud approach is annoying, and cringing is also less effective because no one, and I mean no one, likes to feel that they're being sold to or being pushed. And this is true for men, especially it's true for men in relationships as well. So there was a relationship coach who mentioned to a female client the concept of backleading. In ballroom dancing, men lead because they're generally strong. If both try to lead, then there's going to be confusion and problems. And it'll also cause tension as well in the relationship. So the women do back leading. This is when the woman will step back and forward when she needs to, and this reminds the man which direction he should take. So she doesn't push or pull the man, but positions herself to remind him. So the female client didn't like that her husband was watching soccer and not giving her attention, and she used to nag him, which is the incorrect thing to do. So after being taught back leading, she stood in front of her husband while he was watching TV, and she was wearing lingerie, and she said, well, I'm going to the bedroom and you can join me or not. So she went, and then he switched off the TV and joined his wife. So she positioned herself, you understand, and then invited him to come to her. So this method is also effective in boundary setting. For example, expert in addiction counseling, Amber Hollingsworth of Put the Shovel Down, she was explaining boundaries and how you don't set boundaries by threatening and explaining everything. She basically made it very clear that you can't control other people, but you can control yourself. And you can control what situation you allow yourself to be in. You understand? So you simply don't respond to people if they cross that line. For example, if your work calls you on the weekend and you don't like that they're calling you on the weekends, then you just don't respond. And then if they complain later, say, well, I just don't respond to these calls on the weekend. That's it. Those are my boundaries. You don't have to verbalize it. That's the thing. Then you just calmly say that you don't respond on the weekends, and then instead of getting stuck in other people's drama triangles, you simply remove yourself from the situation because you have better things to do than waste your time. And there's also a problem with telling people what you won't tolerate or give them ultimatums. If you're standing in front of someone and telling them that you won't let them talk to you a certain way, then in a sense you are, because you're in their presence. You understand? So we learn from Asya alayhi salam to be brave in the face of abuse. We learn from Miriam alayhi salam to set boundaries by being content in our space and orbit, facilitated by the connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here with Khadijah alayhi salam, we're learning to make space for what we do want. You understand? So with that in mind, there's another expert already mentioned, Melanie Tonya Evans, the authority on narcissistic abuse, or the narcissistic abuse recovery. And she advises that, so obviously she counsels people that have been through narcissistic abuse, and then when they are wanting to get back in the game or, pursue your relationship, she advises that when you're single and available, then set your standards, but don't market your criteria to everyone. So with Khadijah alayhi salam, it's clear that certain qualities in a man were attractive, and she wasn't interested in other men who were narcissistic and happened to be wealthy, but she didn't broadcast what she was looking for. You'll notice that. Her friend figured it out with her. So if, say, there is a Muslim, a female or male, brothers can also use this advice. And this single Muslim is on what they call in Durban, I think it's called a samosa run, which is basically a chaperone meeting to assess a prospective suitor, right? So then he or she shouldn't tell the prospect what they want, what they need, or what they'll put up with or won't put up with. They should have their short list of qualifications and keep that close to their chest, and then ask questions according to that list. So, for example, one of the criteria is this person must have the need to marry me for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then you don't sit there and go, oh, I'm looking for someone who will marry me for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because then
that
the
assumption
narcissist
is in place.
Yeah, because then somebody who's a narcissist or munafiq, or somebody who's just weak enough and tempted to just go along because they so badly need acceptance, they'll go like, oh yes, of course, I would only marry for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm only about Allah and what's pleasing to Allah, and that's all I care about, and I don't care about anything else. And they will continue to be emphatic, much like in the days of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when the hypocrites used to walk past him and the companions, and they would declare every time, "Indeed, you are the messenger of Allah." And then they would walk off, and then they would pass him again, and they would say it again. "Oh, yes, you are indeed the messenger of Allah." So it's like, so we see this type of behavior in other areas, like when certain women celebrities walk around with the word feminist printed on their clothes. And people find out later that they really don't care about women and women's rights at all, but they've got the word feminist plastered over them. And I mean, I came across a man who basically bragged about how anti-racist he was. And then he took a domestic home as a sleep-in, and we found out that they didn't provide her a mattress to sleep on her bed. There was no mattress on her bed, plus other issues. People who aren't racist don't make a point of telling you they're not. They're just not. You understand? So then another example is when a man cheats on his wife, then he comes home with flowers and chocolates to declare his love loudly and proudly for her. And, I've been a Christian, I've been a Muslim, so I've seen these parallel behaviors in both camps when people are trying to exaggerate their roles.
It's not necessarily confined to a religious group.
No, it's just, it's in the political sphere, it's in business sphere, it's in every relationships. So it's just something that you need to, when somebody's being very loud and vocal about what they are. It's almost like a type of fascism that thrives on a limitation of syntax. There's no curious explanation of their faith. There's just this repetitive sloganeering.
Yeah, it makes me think like the Che Guevara t-shirts and the Tipico t-shirts that all of a sudden became trendy and was built on the backs of child labor.
Wow. That's a brilliant example. So in courtships, there are similar obstacles to navigate. So you want to watch out for what people say about themselves. You'll notice that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he showed her who he was. He didn't tell her who he was. She observed him. She didn't ask him to explain himself. It's also important to know that a woman who knows herself knows what she wants. If people don't know what they want, it shouldn't, because they don't know who they are. Allahu alam. So you'll notice with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he didn't say, yes, these are the qualities that I have. Let me tell you the list of qualities I have. He doesn't say that. A good man of character doesn't tell you, I'm a good man of character. I am very honest and trustworthy. You can rely on me. I'm all about sincerity.
I'm all about morals.
This and that. He just is, and then you can see it, and other people will tell you. And so we see in this case, everyone else told her, he's honest, he's this, he's that, he's this, he's great, he's fantastic. So she had the whole world telling her who he is. So at the expense of getting biblical, you look at a tree by the fruit it bears, then be cautious as a snake and as gentle as a dove, like Khadijah AS was. This means that you read people while being street smart and cautious, but be gracious and diplomatic while proceeding with eyes wide open. Another way of saying this is be awake, but don't stand on a soapbox and declare your findings. You understand? There's also got to be some discretion as well. It's also like the saying, if you say you're a lady, you're not. There's a lot of parallels to that. So again, in both business and relationships, we don't want to be needy, clingy, or desperate. We don't want to have those qualities, but we've also got to watch out for those who do. We mentioned how the father of the bride, in the case of Musa alayhi salam, I'm repeating this, but it is relevant to how I'm going to link it later. So we mentioned how the father of the bride, in the case of Musa alayhi salam, played a pivotal role, and that if Khadijah alayhi salam was married and widowed, then her father would have been involved in picking those men, and these relationships would have added to her experience and understanding. Allahu alam. But what about women who don't have fathers? What about mature women and reverts? Sometimes there are work opportunities where a woman can observe how a man operates. She can also use other people to create boundaries and to monitor the situation. In the Western world, when people go on dates, women usually observe how the man treats waitering staff and other people while on the date. But in a samosa run, that might not work if you are meeting the parents at each other's respective houses, although there's some things you might be able to pick up, though.
One has to be very astute because it's a different scenario, but I hear you. Yes.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt to learn body language at all, non-verbal communication. So Khadijah AS had the opportunity to observe the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he, like before prophethood, when he's just a man, in other situations. So here we're just looking at a man of character. This is before prophethood. This is before either of them are Muslims. Like Islam is now established in this respect. So now we're just looking at a woman of character and a man of character. Women today can have similar strategies that keep themselves within the bounds of Sharia. She can take note of a man's demeanor, receive a lot of feedback, and negotiate through mutual friends and relatives when it finally comes to nikah. So the nikah literally means contract. We've been speaking about business, which has a lot to do with contracts and formalities. It's not at all romantic, and nor is it supposed to be. So you've got to be, it's something that you have to be conscious about and cognizant about. So the problem with dating and casual relationships, like we see in the Western world, is that they don't involve other parties to help us objectively identify what is beneficial. And that is when we are attracted to someone, then we are infatuated. So besides the physical attraction, which already is the temptation that's going to weaken us, there's the analytical critical part of the brain that shuts down. So there was an experiment done on a man who just got married, and he was still very much in the honeymoon phase. And they showed him a variety of pictures, and there was a lot of brain activity. Like on the brain scan, you see the brain lighting up like a Christmas tree, astaghfirullah. But as soon as they showed him a picture of his wife, who he just got married to, the analytical critical part of his brain, there was no activity. It shut down. There was no activity on the screen. So this is also why people have affairs if they also lack boundaries, morals, and overall wisdom with common sense. That's why having a family and other people facilitate is important, because they have objectivity and full brain function. Inshallah. So.
Well, I suppose it's as simple as saying, and yes, I absolutely hear you on the neuroscience, which fascinates me, because there it's clear, it's in material terms. Can you see how this happened?
Yeah.
But the difficulty exactly as human beings is to detach the emotion. Most of our actions are in some way or the other permeated with emotion.
Yeah.
So whether it's about the ego, you know, sort of affirming your own pride or being arrogant, so whether it's about that, or in this case, being infatuated with somebody and then completely unable to make a rational decision.
Yeah,
Yes.
and it gets worse. It gets worse because okay, we still have time. Infatuation is very similar to addiction. Bringing back the master addiction counselor Amber Hollingsworth was explaining how addiction, or how any obsession can twist a person's thinking, because this person has blinders on and can't get a broader view of the situation. So for this reason, the family, and especially the parents, get involved traditionally in Islam. Without exception, everyone in active addiction has a skewed view of reality, without exception. People get stupefied by limerence. Just think of the minister's wife when she tore at Yusuf alayhi salam from behind, and he was bolting for a reason, because he's also human. Abdullah Yusuf Ali gives a nice expression as he describes her as sex crazy or maddened by lust. Then later you see her speech when she comes to her senses, but unfortunately the damage was done. And so the devil leads you to where you are, and then leaves you there to realize it. That happens. So in terms of nikah, it's important to understand this, because you are engaging in a life-changing contract. In Islam, if a person is not of sound mind, then his testimony can be null and void, so much so that a scholar once told this other sister that if her husband has even mild depression, that his talaq doesn't count as a strike, because he isn't of sound mind. They can separate, so they can go through the action of separation, but the reality is most people get divorced due to perception issues. What the scholar is saying, however, is that if there is a clear mental health problem, then they can reconcile once the mental health problem has been resolved, but then she'll also have to consider other moral implications as well. For example, if someone is losing their mind because they are abusing substances or catching on haram, that causes them to stress and thus gives him depression. So it's a question of whether the horse came before the cart, etc. So does he have mental health issues because he set himself up in a moral way, or does he have mental health problems that cause him to speak and act out of alignment of his true morals and character? So it's a very tricky one. It might seem like I'm going off topic, but I'm actually not. I'm going to come back to...
I know it will go, yeah.
Yeah, so Dr. Ayman, who does brain scans for learning disabled people and has identified several types of attention deficit disorder, he said that there was this woman, she was a Baptist preacher's wife, and she was a very devout Christian, very conservative, and she had some type of ADD, but she was misdiagnosed, or she was given the wrong medication, and it made her so uninhibited that she actually flashed a tracker while she drove past. And then when she got to Dr. Ayman's clinic, they gave her the right diagnosis, the right medication, and she was, of course, horrified. So this is an example of how somebody can completely act out of character just because of mental health issues.
Yes.
So that's not who she was. It is a general advice from psychologists that a person shouldn't make major decisions. This is where we're coming back to the point. You shouldn't really make major decisions while going through a depression, because obviously you don't want to make decisions when your thinking is impaired.
Well, under the
understand?
influence of emotions.
And also the emotions is love drunk as was a type of drunkenness,
course.
you see. So in
Of course, so I'm sort of saying it tongue in cheek, under the influence of emotions, but as
Yeah,
human beings, how do you ever detach it?
yeah.
It's your own acknowledgement
You're not
of the
sober.
fact.
You're not
Yes,
completely sober.
yes.
This is the thing. So in the case of a premarital situation, we have people potentially in a form of active addiction that's obsessive, is going to seriously affect their obsessiveness is seriously going to affect their judgment. Their brain is a hot mess, and there are scans to prove it. So people can't base their decisions on women fancy. It must be based on information. But it is a life defining and life changing decision. It's a big deal. So it helps to include other people, especially if they are trustworthy, like in Khadijah's case, her staff, her friend, her cousin. And the uncle of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So neither of them had their parents, but that doesn't mean you can't leverage with other family and relatives, inshallah.
Of course, that's where your significant others come in and the tribe that you trust.
Yes.
Sister Lilla, I actually didn't want to break into this very, very
No, it's
provocative conversation, but let's quickly have our break and we'll
Yeah.
pick up on that afterwards. You are listening to Community Pulse on Radio 786 100.4 FM. We are currently in our segment on social justice, speaking to Sister Lilla. Today's topic, the strength in the sweetest whisper. Stay tuned, we'll be back shortly.